listen to what your work wants to look like, because that's, who you are.
This is the Bold Artist Podcast.
You have answers and you're expressing them in your art. Your art is important and it needs to be seen.
Welcome, and let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back. We are here with another episode of the Bold Artist Podcast, and this show is a part 2 with Corey Moortgat, the guest in our last show. And I'm here with Charla to introduce Corey again and share with you a few things that really stood out to us about the last episode and why we decided to have a part 2. Good morning, Charla.
Good morning, Mary Janelle.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. Excited to talk about color.
Yes, and apparently you win the Good Hair Award on this podcast. Following episode 1, where you were the artist who was featured, I got texts saying, I love your co-host's hair. And I realized I had a bad hair day that day.
Oh, I don't know. I'll take it. I'll take whatever I can get for good hair day.
You looked good. And in case any of our listeners or watchers on YouTube haven't seen episode 1 with Charla telling her story, definitely go back in our lineup and watch Charla in episode 1 and hear her story. And we are also in the pilot sharing our vision and dreams about this podcast. But here today in this episode, we're back with a part 2 featuring Corey Moortgat. And Charla, you did introduce Corey in the last episode, but can you give a quick intro again here? And then we just want to share a little bit about what really meant a lot to us in the last episode.
Yeah, so Corey is a mentor with Bold School. That's how we refer to her, but she's an incredible bold artist. She paints amazing, expressive portraits. She is in our community a lot during the week, chatting with our artists, encouraging and giving feedback. She's just completely an honest and such a special character to have in there. Everybody loves her. And really, if you're already inside of Bold School, you know Corey way better than you know me. She's around a lot more than me. And if you haven't listened to part 1, definitely go back and listen, because she's sharing some really great things in there about her life and about art in general. She's full of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. And, just because I have an inside peek into Bold School here working on this podcast and producing, I get to see how fast Corey responds to comments and how good she is at it. She's amazing with the students. And so anyone who's even considering joining Bold School, you're going to love the team and the mentors that Charla has on the inside. And Corey is one of them. And you will hear in the last episode that she is so full of emotion. It shows in her work. She's vulnerable, real, raw. She really just opens up in these 2 episodes. And when it came time to be editing and us being very conscious of how long episodes last, we want to hit that 30 to 40 minute mark. We just felt we didn't want to edit out any of Corey's content. So we came back with a part 2 just to expand and let her share just in fullness with everyone here on the podcast. So I think you'll really enjoy just hearing a part 2 with Corey. In part 1, one of the quotes that Corey said that really just kapow, it stood out to me, was this. She said, bold color isn't about using bold, bright colors, but using any color boldly. I love it. I'm actually just going to say it again here to let it all sink in. Bold color isn't using bold, bright colors. It's using any color boldly. And Charla, you are the genius behind Bold School, bold color. Tell me how Corey's quote speaks to you, what it means to you.
First, I just want to say, the word genius actually can mean your soul. It can refer to the genius inside you, which is your soul. So when you call me a genius, I will say that my soul is made of bold color, and that's why you're referring to me that way.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was afraid I was going to get in trouble for calling you genius, because you're so modest and you don't want to be called all these fancy words. So I was like, oh, she's going to say something about me calling her a genius. But I'm glad you accepted it, because you are a genius and your soul is made of bold, bright colors. With that being said, how does your soul feel about that quote? Bold color isn't using bold, bright colors, but using any color boldly.
Yeah, I think that Corey couldn't have said it better. That's why she's like in there talking and sharing with everybody every day, because she's amazing. Such great insight. Painting boldly, you know, it's about it's really about creative freedom. I think that's what she's kind of saying. So many people look at my work and they just see a bright, bold color. It's abstract, you know, it's unexpected. It's not realism. It's not realistic color. So they see it and they see a bright red or a bright blue, and they think that that's what they have to do. Just put those bright colors on the canvas. But getting it to work is not quite that simple. But I think that painting boldly is definitely more about, there's more than just even color. It's expression, and it's the brushwork. It's what you're putting on the canvas, and it's being able to be confident about what you're doing and your message, and vulnerability, right? You talk about that. Being vulnerable is being bold, because you're putting yourself out there. And I think Corey does that really well. So one thing that she talks about, even within our free community, if you're in there, she goes in and often talks to people about, look at your work in a way that's not really thinking about the color. You got to look about what you're attempting to express. So you're looking at a portrait. We're not just going to make an exact copy of that portrait and it always be a likeness. We're thinking about the message that we want to portray. So if you look at her work, you'll see a lot of sad expression, like pain and despair in some of her work. And she paints these crying eyes and red eyes. But what you don't know is that the reference photos she's using are not always faces that have that despair or that sadness in them. She creates that and she puts that in there, and that's her bold expression. And then if you look at the color, you're going to see some bold uses of color. You're going to see some bright saturated tones, but you're also going to see a lot of neutralized values, neutralized tones, and it all just works together magically to tell the story, to create balance, to create focus. I think that's a lot of what she's referring to. And it's something that even artists within the school tend to forget, because we get so wrapped up in our skill and our color mixing, which is awesome and so much fun and everything. Our art is everything once we have the skill figured out, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I think that that's what Corey really speaks about well. And it was just amazing listening to her in the first part of her episode.
I love it that you mentioned the word, it was a little further back, you mentioned the word freedom. And you've talked here about the skills and how sometimes we just get so focused on the skills. But you have said many times within Bold School that through learning the skills and through applying ourselves in that daily practice, in that hard work, the freedom comes after we learn all of these skills. And I think about that in relationship to Corey's quote, bold color isn't using bold, bright colors, but using any color boldly. I feel that using colors boldly also comes after learning about the skill and the qualities of color. And so I have recently, we were actually putting together a blog post that features me. And I was asked the question, that the answer I gave was that I would say to beginners to balance practice and play, because that practice and that learning part, you have to get that skill and repetition and automate those skills within you. But then comes the freedom. And I think sometimes we just want the freedom. People look at your work and they see the freedom of color and the freedom of brushstrokes, but it came after so much practice and learning. And I feel that Corey is such a good example of that she's put in the hours to learn and shows us how she's taken all that she's learned and developed her own unique style that expresses so much freedom. But it's that beautiful balance between learning the skill and then expressing with freedom. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I totally agree. One thing about Corey that you'll see in the community as well is she posts her own work all the time whenever she has something new. and it almost feels like it's every day of the week. She's in her studio and painting, and she's a mom of 3 kids. She's got teenagers. She's busy, but she is painting. She's putting in that time. She's practicing and working on her own growth and her own skills all the time. So it's very evident in knowing her and watching her journey. It's so important, and because of that, she's able to express, and she's always reaching for more, going for something bigger and bolder, you could say.
Yeah, so it's almost as if we could say skill building is the doorway to the freedom.
Yes.
The freedom that everyone wants, skill building is the door. And you've made a way for people to do that through Bold School. Corey's a mentor inside of Bold School, and we're so excited to have her here on a part 2 featuring Corey Moortgat. So let's just take it right on over to the interview with Corey, part 2. Have you had a time where you had a really big hurdle, whether that means a creative block or a heart matter that, maybe a lack of confidence? I don't know. Have you had something that just was really holding you back that you pushed through, got through? Could you tell us how that happened?
I mean, I guess, like I said earlier, how before I got into Charla's class, I was trying to create paintings to sell. And I think anytime you start to take on a new medium, there's sort of that period of time where you're like, okay, I knew what I was doing when I was doing mixed media stuff. And I knew how to get to that point where I was creating stuff I liked that felt personal and meaningful. But then switching to this, all painting and trying to sell sell things, create stuff that people are going to want to buy. It's sort of like you're floundering because you don't know what's my style. What is my style? I can paint realistically, but I don't know what my style is. And so that's what I was searching for and trying to find. And, just something clicked with Charlotte's techniques that's what I had been searching for. No, it might not be what everybody was searching for, but it was what I personally needed to find in order to really delve into it.
Well, I do know that for me personally, Charla's, I had the privilege of taking her, I would say, training workshops before there was a Bold School.
Oh, yeah.
So I was in one of her very, very first, actually in the city of Kelowna. We all gathered in an art studio and I learned from her. And she did take the lid off for me in exactly what you said about the paying attention to the values and how to abstract the bold color and use color. And I even still have the paintings that I painted with her that day. Actually, it was 2 occasions. So I have all the paintings. And I didn't even think I could paint portraits and wasn't even really interested in portraiture. But really wanted to learn from Charla. So I feel very blessed that I started way back then with her, and now I've seen the journey of what Bold School has become.
I bet that's amazing to watch because
it really is.
Even me, who's only been part of it for a year and a half or so, it's been amazing to watch.
It's been quite a transformation. And coming back to what you were speaking about is you said maybe it's not what everyone needs to learn, but I feel like everyone could benefit from Bold Color Bootcamp, whether or not they're even wanting to pursue abstracted color or whether they're wanting to pursue portraiture. I feel like there's just something there that they need to learn from.
Oh, definitely.
And I think the same goes for the classes that you're offering in Bold School as well. It's so important to learn from different teachers, different ways, but yet there's a common theme amongst what's happening in Bold School.
And I always feel if you're going to take a class, online or otherwise, even if you can walk away with one new technique or one just, makes you think to be able to apply, it could take your art in a whole new direction that might not be that technique or that style, but anything that kind of inspires you to move forward in your art and try something you haven't tried before is going to be positive, whether you take everything from that class or not.
One aha moment can change it all, right?
Exactly,
Yes. So you've spoken a few times during this interview about the stage that you were at where you were really needing to sell your work and approaching the paintings, wondering what's my style and also will it sell? At this stage where you're at now, do you worry when you start a piece, are you concerned about whether or not it will sell, or do you paint to paint and then it might sell?
For the most part, I just do it because I love it. And I think, you can't really paint without, I think loving what you're doing is going to be more sellable than painting just to try to sell it, because there's not emotion in there, and there's not, heart in the painting if it's just being painted, to sell to someone.
I so fully agree with you. And I've always felt that as artists, it's almost like our duty to paint for ourselves first, being true to who we are and letting the world see that in that vulnerability that you and I have spoken about. And that, I think, is one of the hardest things for artists, especially ones who want to make a living off their art, to do, because then there's that commercial side where we say, how do we sell it? And then perhaps we're not being true to who we are. And it is a spot that a lot of artists get stuck in. And so thank you for speaking into that and being real about where you are with it right now. Because it's an important conversation. We've spoken about vulnerability and about, you spoke about seeing past even what the subject matter is and seeing shapes and values. And that is a technique, a really important way artists need to see when we're actually painting. But there's a conversation that Charla and I have had a few times, and that I've had with many artists, about the idea of just in life itself, seeing with the heart. And I think artists are really gifted to see with our hearts. We are visionaries, and we see life a little different because we're always coming from the approach of creating, and how can I create from my experiences, and what will I create from my experiences? And I wanted, because you were so in touch with being vulnerable and speaking emotion through your work, I wanted to ask you about this idea of seeing with your heart, and if there's anything that comes to your mind on that subject of how you see life in general, and how that just filters and translates through your work.
I spoke a little bit earlier about taking these hard emotions and making them beautiful, in a sense. And while I wouldn't necessarily call myself an optimistic person, I think being able to see the beauty in the world, and whether it's in the way you decorate your house, or the clothing that you wear, or just in the way you view the outside world. And as an artist, I think everything you can view artistically, constantly, I could be in any situation and look over and think, oh, that would make a gorgeous painting because of those colors, And so it's a nice way to live, I think. I wouldn't say I have pity, but I feel sorry for people that can't live that way, that can't see just beauty and see the world artistically. I've always, just like, that's my life. My entire life is, kind of, I guess, affected by art and color and the visual world. And so I think that definitely helps, helps you make it through the day, helps you make it through hard times, because at least you've got that can bring joy into your heart, even in a hard time, it can still bring joy, just seeing something visually beautiful.
Yes, I agree. I feel that, like, when I even just drive down the road, I see art everywhere. I look over here, I'm like, that's a painting. I look over here, that's a sculpture. And even my photographic mind, I'm taking pictures everywhere I go. And it's like those senses for an artist are just always turned on.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And it is a beautiful way of seeing life with the heart, and even in the hardest times. where we're going. You've spoken about the difficult times and that being translated into your art. And what's so beautiful about that is it's like the ashes to beauty story where it's such a difficult time, but something beautiful is gonna come out of it. And artists are those, privileged individuals that get to turn the ashes to beauty in whatever form or whatever mediums or subject matter that they choose.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I love that about the work that you do. And yes. So is there anything else, Corey, that is on your heart or mind that you'd want to share with those who are listening to encourage them or give them some pointers?
You mentioned earlier that I wrote a book several years ago, and I touch on this a little bit in my book, because through my art therapy background, I really learned a lot about finding your own personal symbols and finding, things that have meaning to you individually and searching for those as an artist. And so it's something I always like to encourage people. I know that it is very hard to figure out what, is your style and what speaks to you and what you can let flow freely onto your canvas. I know that's hard. I'm a very, very, I'm a perfectionist. I'm a very anal, kind of person. I like things to go right and do it detailed. And so reaching a point where I could be loose and free with my artwork and kind of let my emotions and my inner life come out was a hard journey. And I know that people struggle with that. So I just always encourage people to figure out what you enjoy doing. What colors really speak to you? What colors are you drawn to every time you paint? What kind of brush marks are you drawn to? What kind of shapes show up? Something I talk about in my book is to take a lot of your pieces and lay them out together and see what themes you start to see. Are there certain colors that are in all of them? Or are there certain shapes or forms that are in all of your pieces? And if they are, explore that. Figure out what it means to you, what that shape or that, color means to you, and play with that as you continue to work. And it's a way for you to start, kind of reaching in and letting that out. And I know that's so hard for so many people. So that's what I would, kind of offer as advice in that realm.
I love that, Corey, because that is something that Charla and I have definitely wanted to touch on is the development of your personal style. Because a lot of times someone can take a workshop and just begin to copy, which is great. They learn, when they take your workshop in Bold School, they'll learn from you and copy, what you are painting. But there comes a point that to really advance, to level up, that artist needs to find their own style and to have their work set apart and unique to show it's theirs. And that step of finding your own style is so difficult for artists, but you've spoken into some real practical how-tos, like just taking your body of work or what you're working on and seeing the similarities, what you said about shapes or colors. And then there's a little something that I want to add in there from my own personal experience is the fact that once you see the colors and shapes and like a little bit of continuity happening, you have to accept it.
Yeah.
And that has been hard.
Exactly.
Accept, embrace. Yes, that's a better word. But I have noticed that I add pink in. Like a painting doesn't feel completely finished unless I even just put like a little tiny pink somewhere.
You and I are soul sisters because I am all about pink.
I know. But what's funny is I don't generally wear pink, although I did go through a little phase with that. But I don't generally decorate with it, or it's not like it's like, where's the pink coming from? And then it was hard for me to embrace that because I thought I gravitated to more turquoise or something different. And so to embrace just that, and that my brush strokes have a certain way, and yet maybe I've been fighting with them a little I want them to be blockier or chunkier, and yet they're long and graceful. And so that whole embracing, like once you see the continuity of your style introducing itself to you.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to embrace and go, okay, I'm going to run with it.
That's your muse talking to you, and you need to listen to that muse. And I think that's why, like I was saying earlier, that sometimes if I try to borrow a palette from another artist and it just isn't feeling right, I think that's where you just need to be able to listen to that. And I think that's where some people are like, oh, well, I love so-and-so's artwork and I want to, mimic that. And I want my piece to look just like theirs. But if it's not feeling right and if it's not natural for you to work that way, you're never going to be satisfied with it. And it's never going to feel right in you, I guess.
That's such good advice on the terms of finding your own style and your own voice. And I speak a lot about finding your own voice, even now in the launching of the podcast. Everything that we create, you have to find the voice for it. And that comes whether it's a podcast or whether it's paintings, you're finding a voice, and that it doesn't have to be a literal audible voice, but even in painting, you're finding a way to speak. And Corey Moortgat, your work is speaking, and it's speaking beautifully. It's evoking emotion and connection. And then we also get the honor and privilege that you are speaking into the lives of students at Bold School, mentoring and offering classes and courses. And we are so honored to have you as part of the community. So thank you.
I mean, I love it. This job was a godsend, and it's just so perfect for me. Everything about it.
Well, you're amazing at it. You're amazing at mentoring the students. And do you have a little something you want to say just to the students that you've had here on Bold School?
I mean, you guys hear from me a lot, obviously. And I think just listen to yourself. And like we were just speaking about, listen to what your heart is telling you to do. It doesn't matter if your work looks like somebody else's. It doesn't matter if it looks like mine or like Charla's. Listen to what your work wants to look like, because that's, who you are. And you can take these, more practical techniques like value and color and use that, but allow your voice to come out when you work.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the Bold Artist Podcast. We are so happy to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Allow your voice to come out when you work. I love that quote by our guest artist, Corey Moortgat. This has been a part 1 and part 2 featuring Corey. If you missed part 1, do hop back in our episodes and listen to all of Corey's story, where she shares about the deep emotion behind her portrait work. You can also take classes by Corey by going to boldschool.com and checking out her expressive portrait series. You will find great value there, learning to paint with Corey and also Charla and other instructors at Bold School. Thank you for joining us, whether it's on the Bold School YouTube channel or listening on an audio app. We're on Apple, Google, and Spotify, and you can find us there by searching the Bold Artist Podcast. You just search Bold Artist Podcast and hit follow on the audio app, and a new episode is available every Friday morning. And also, don't forget, we're on Instagram at Bold Artist Podcast. You can leave us a message and check out the art that we post of all the artists and updates there on Instagram. Until next time, keep creating.